Hello, everyone. Welcome to T1D Stories, where we have conversations with people who break through the challenges of living with type 1 diabetes to achieve whatever they want in life, both big and small. My name is Adrian Gonzalez, and I'm part of the Greater New England chapter of Breakthrough T1D. And my guest today is Emilee Herringshaw, who is a dermatology resident at the University of Massachusetts. She's a proud graduate of UMass Chan Medical School, where she earned both her MD and MBA and continues her training. So we all know that becoming a medical doctor is not easy, and neither is getting your MBA. But Emilee, I should say Dr. Herringshaw, has done both. So take that type 1 diabetes. And, that drive didn't come out of nowhere. Diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at age 2, Emilee brings a lifelong patient perspective to her work, one that shapes her compassionate, patient-centered approach to care and her commitment to improving the patient experience through innovation. So, with that, Emilee, welcome to T1D Stories.
Thanks so much, Adrian. Really happy to be here on T1D Stories and appreciative of the opportunity to share more about my life with T1D and how it's really made me into the person that I am today, both with its challenges and its highlights. So I look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, no, well, absolutely, and thank you for making the time. I know, like I said, being a doctor, not only is it difficult to become a doctor, but once you become a doctor, your schedule is crazy. You've got a lot of commitments and everything else. So I really appreciate you, making the time to be with us today. So let's, dive right into it. Let's start with, the question that we always start with here at T1D Stories, and that is, when did you get diagnosed with type 1 diabetes? So I said you were diagnosed at age 2, so that was a while ago. Um,
Mhm.
you obviously, I assume you don't remember life before type 1 diabetes, but maybe what were some of the symptoms that maybe your parents or whoever, kind of noticed, what were you experiencing that your parents noticed that kind of led to the diagnosis?
Yeah, all excellent questions. And you are absolutely correct in saying that I don't know life before T1D. So it really has been part of my experience the whole time. I can share that my parents have many stories remembering kind of those early days of the unknown where I was losing weight. I wasn't my sparky self playing with friends out in the front yard. And believe it or not, I actually flagged down a waitress for water at a restaurant by standing up on the booth. So when a 2-year old is looking for extra sips like that, something is up. And my parents had a very good intuition with that. So brought me to my pediatrician, at which point I was pretty quickly diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the age of 2, being the only person in my family, and still am the only person right now, at least in my family, with type 1.
So no family history. Wow. So were you already pretty far, were your numbers pretty high when you got diagnosed, or did they catch this pretty early on?
Yeah, I think the numbers were somewhere between the six and the 800s. I'd be interested to look at that chart review, but I don't know the precise value, but I think I was pretty far up there. I
Now,
was
do you
in the
have,
ICU, so.
okay, so you went to the hospital and
hmm
you went through
hmm
the whole process, which unfortunately is, the experience that many folks that are diagnosed, have to go through, especially kids at that age.
Yeah.
So do you have other siblings, or is it just you?
Yes, I have a younger brother who is very happy, healthy, and does not have type 1. And I say younger, and he's about 28, but it still counts. So he also went through it with me. He would help me. He would prepare my meter, my glucose meter for testing. I think he could do that by like age 4, which is impressive. And I think it was kind of all hands on deck from the start with regards to how my family managed things and navigated things and learned how to grow with me as we encounter different aspects of this disease through different periods in our life. I mean, being diagnosed at age 2, I know that back then we had the glucose meters. It took about 60 seconds to read. And now I have my lovely cell phone and Apple Watch that can tell me my number in the middle of derm surgery during the day. So we've come a long way, and it's been really interesting to see that technology evolve and also how my own personal relationship with diabetes has evolved over the years.
Yeah, that's great. We're going to get into, some of that, but you're right. I mean, I think, this is something that not only impacts obviously the person that gets diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, but the broader family as well. I mean, my oldest daughter is the one that has type 1 diabetes, but she's got three siblings, and they've all been part of this journey in one way or another, and obviously us as parents as well. So you've lived with type 1 diabetes since early childhood, right? Through your toddler years, adolescence, college,
Mhm.
into adulthood, medical school. I mean,
Mhm.
how has your relationship with T1D evolved over time, and how would you kind of describe it today?
Absolutely. So I would say it's certainly ebbed and flowed over time. I think, earlier when I was in preschool and elementary school, I was learning how to manage blood sugars as much as a 6-year-old brain can conceptualize. But, that meant like counting carbs and entering them in my pump when I eventually got one at age 8. And I even did a presentation to my class. I remember like a PowerPoint presentation, if we want to throw it back to those days. And then, as I entered middle school and high school, commonly with many other individuals who are just navigating life's challenges and figuring out identity, I definitely shied away from, and I would actually say completely eliminated, actually speaking about diabetes. And I think a lot of that was trying to figure out what my diagnosis meant to me at a later age, because as you had kind of alluded to earlier in the podcast, I was physically diagnosed with diabetes at age 2, but I didn't get to go through the psychological experience of learning, what my life would look like with this condition because it was so normalized for me as early as I was. So I think, during high school and earlier parts of college, I would say like the emotions even included shame and embarrassment and frustration and kind of knowing that it was hard to be on the receiving end of other people's kind of opinions on what my life might be or their expectations of what my life might be with diabetes. And I found that, my some of my challenges were not having it like received in a venue where I felt like I was really heard. So that did change for me when I decided to actually join up with um, the JDRF at the time. It was the Young Leadership, and I know that we're breakthrough now, but it was the Young Leadership Committee. I was invited by one of my friends who I was in honors chemistry with at Boston College, and I was like, you know what? I can go to a social. I've done that before. It'll just be a social with diabetes where that and that's the attitude that everybody took. So that was really the first step was like having the courage to do that. Um, and once I was there, I started to think a little bit more about my relationship with diabetes. And by no means was I, very vocal about it at the time with friends outside of that group, but it did eventually cause me to take pause and think about how I wanted to channel my biochemistry degree from Boston College. And I decided to pivot and I entered the medical field as a medical assistant. I was hired at a dermatology practice, and that was really the catalyst when I started to become comfortable with my diabetes, in part because I realized how much I could help other people with it. So it was no longer a hard experience that I was living, but it was one that I could give through. And I think that recognizing that and kind of embracing the traits that it gave me, the grit, the resilience, the like problem solving, those are all incredible attributes that to this day carry me through my hardest days at work and the new problems I'm trying to solve. So I started to kind of like warm up to the idea of embracing it, and then it's only been an upward trajectory since. So when I went to medical school, I was continuing to develop that relationship and also appreciate the impact that it had on me during my clinical rotations with regards to having empathy for what patients were going through. And then I really kind of it took off. I mean, with my now fiance, we led a elective course on diabetes for medical students. I started to integrate diabetes into my academic research, which I'm still working on today, which is awesome. It's a merger between dermatology and diabetes, more to come. So I think that it has like absolutely changed. And I think part of that is just having the courage to say, this is going to be hard, but I'm going to do it anyway. And that has permeated most things that I do in life. And I'm very grateful for that.
Wow, that's great. I mean, a lot to unpack there, but I think your journey is kind of, I think, common to many folks, right? Especially, I always say, it's hard enough being a preteen and a teen as it is without type 1 diabetes. But,
Mhm.
the fact that, you have a pump or you have to take insulin injections and all that, it's natural not to want to stand out or be different, from the crowd. So I think that's a common experience or fear or reaction that young folks have to it. But then again, like you said, I think this has been a kind of a common thread with all the episodes that we've done is at some point, and we've had people that have been diagnosed as adults and others that have been diagnosed, like yourself at a very young age. But at some point, you kind of come to you kind of hit a point in the road where you say, hey, you know what? take a more positive aspect, perspective to it. What has this disease taught me? What are some of the skills that I've had to learn to not only live healthily with type 1 diabetes, but that have actually made me into the person I am today, in terms of providing me with that grit, providing me with that, drive, so on and so forth. And it seems like you kind of captured that, and that really shaped, your education and ultimately shaping your career today, right?
That is absolutely spot on. I you said it beautifully, and I definitely echo those sentiments. And I think that pivotal perspective, thinking about things from a deficit natured outlook to something that is differentiating you and value additive. And I know that's the business part of me speaking, but like that really, that really did change it for me is when I stopped looking at things as, we talk about, diabetes as being the absence of insulin. Well, what if it's like the addition of resilience and positive spirit? And I think if you can kind of take that optimism with you through your challenges, it just lets you embrace them a little bit more. And I will say that diabetes is something that elicits a lot of decision making throughout the day, and even learning how to make small but hard decisions and rely on myself for that as much as I rely on other people. Many decisions I make a day I have to make on my own. Learning how to do that from a young age can be very transformative in how you look at challenges and the unknown, and being willing to take on risks where you might fail because you know that even if you do, you'll learn from them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know speaking, my daughter was on the program, so she spoke for herself, beautifully. But as a parent, my wife and I definitely noticed, she was diagnosed at age 11, right? So she already had, she knew what life was like without type 1 diabetes. But we definitely noticed a change in her, and a change for, I would say, for the positive. She used to be more quiet, more reserved, before type 1, but I think, she took that kind of hey, I'm not going to let this stop me from doing what I want in life. And she became much more of an extrovert. And now we can't, sometimes she's the loudest person in the room, which, when we think back when she was in kindergarten or first or second grade, you would never have thought that this little girl who was quiet and reserved is now the young woman. She's 25 today, and an successful engineer and all that. But I think, similar to you, I think she and many others, right? She took this very negative thing that happens to you because no one wants to live with a chronic, potentially deadly disease. But she took that and said, okay, what am I going to do with this, and turn that into a positive. So you already kind of touched upon this a little bit, but maybe to put a bow on it. I mean, as you look back, what has living with type 1 diabetes taught you about yourself? If you had to like kind of like boil it down.
Yeah. I think that it's taught me how to be a problem solver. I think, we always talk about there are 42 plus factors that influence blood sugar. So how do you kind of distill that down and execute and define how to move from step one to step two when you don't know what's in between point one and point two? I think that in that sense, it's helped me become a problem solver. I think it's taught me to be a really good listener because we don't know what other people's experience is. And we will never know because we're not in their shoes, but at least we can give them the opportunity to share if they elect to do so. And I think that that's what I try to carry into patient rooms. But, I think that we can connect sometimes about common experiences that aren't even assigned to type 1 diabetes or any other condition you live with, but just like the shared human experience, as you pointed out, which we're all navigating and going through at different stages in life. So I definitely appreciate that type of relatability. It's brought me in all irony, as I once said, I thought in some ways it couldn't. I appreciate that. And it has brought me community. I do think that that's excellent. I think I've made some great friends through this experience. I've seen other people kind of both struggle and triumph, which is, it's helpful to kind of have that context. And learn about, for example, like what is it like for their partners? What is it like for their family? Because like you mentioned, this is a, a communal disease in some way, like where your entire community is part of it. And I think navigating that is also something that can be challenging and can fluctuate at different periods in your life. So I've also appreciated the community aspect.
I love that last piece because I think community is so important, here. Because I mean, trying to navigate this by yourself is so difficult, right? And it
Mhm.
could be very frustrating or very lonely, right? Because,
Right.
you feel like you're the only one that's going through something, or you have so many questions, but you really don't have someone to turn to that maybe has dealt with that issue, whether it's, going away to college. How do you deal with, going away to college for the first time, having type 1 diabetes, or navigating through something like as intense as medical school with type 1 diabetes, right? So all these questions that people might have,
Hmm.
that's where community, helps because, you can listen to stories such as yours. You can ask the questions. You're all experiencing or have experienced, the same things. I know for me, my wife and I, when we got involved with Breakthrough T1D, J2RF back in the day,
Hmm.
that was a big part of it. I mean, when we do the Breakthrough T1D rides, and every time we go to those rides, I mean, that's the best part, right? Yes, there's the fundraising, the raising the money and all that to
Hmm.
help find the cure. But a lot of it is just, hey, these are my people, right? These are
Yeah.
there are other parents like us that have children with this. And then for my daughter, for her to be able to, see others that are wearing that pump, right? Or the
Hmm.
CGM, right?
Hmm.
And I know my daughter always says, when she sees some of the CGM or she wears the Omnipod out in the wild.
Yeah.
It's like all they have to do is just kind of look at each other, and there's kind of this shared experience without even having to exchange a single word, right? So
Yeah.
I love that community aspect of it. Well, Emilee, as a way to wrap up, same question we always ask at the end, and it's kind of taking a look ahead at the future and a
Mhm.
future that we all hope for, which is a world without type 1, diabetes. I mean, what would that world mean to you, a world without type 1 diabetes?
Yeah, it would be an interesting one. Kind of as I mentioned, I alluded to all the highlights and the character building moments that this condition has helped me realize and grow through. I think a world without type 1 would be a different one. I think that it is in the future. There's a lot of amazing research going on right now. And I think that it's one that would, allow people to kind of thrive in their own way. I think that as much as I do appreciate everything that I have helped build with my community through the experience of living with diabetes, it's a lot of work. And sometimes you forget that because it's your normal and, you go away with friends for a weekend or you go on vacation. And then it's kind of like a reminder sometimes of, oh, it is like a lot of extra work to like count my carbs and plan my meals and do all of this. So I do think in some sense it has created structures through which I have to operate. I think that it would allow for freedom. And I think it would allow me to kind of channel some of the current attention and focus that I dedicate to this disease to other aspects of my life, like running or research or, spending time with my family or my dog or things like that. So I think that that type of freedom at this point, given everything that I've benefited from with having this and many other people who have as well, I think that's kind of like what my future would look like. And I think it would be amazing.
I think that's the word, amazing. That's something I hear a lot from folks that have answered this question, as well as, freedom, right? I mean, even like you said, you're going away for the weekend. Did you pack enough insulin? Did you pack enough, extra pods or extra, a backup device or syringes in case your pump fails? And so you always have to be thinking about these things where, without it, like myself and others that don't have it, we could just walk out the door and not, have to think about it, right? So,
Yeah.
but that is a day that, having been involved now, since how many years has it been now? It's been almost 15 years. I've seen tremendous progress
Hmm.
in this world with what's happening with stem cells, what's happening, on so many different fronts on the research side that certainly there's a lot of reasons to be, optimistic
Hmm.
that better days are certainly ahead of us. Emilee, I don't want to take more of your time. You've been very gracious with your time. I know you're busy, but thank you so much for being with us. For taking the time to be with us today, for sharing your story. Your patients and the UMass medical community are incredibly fortunate to have you because you bring, all the right ingredients to the field, right? Commitment, compassion, and innovation. And those are the same ingredients that matter when it comes to living well with type 1 diabetes. So, again, thank you for sharing your story with us.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity, Adrian, and for doing this and for, showing ki especially kids, it's soft spot in my heart, um, that you can live like a really fruitful life with T1D.
Great. So, for those of you that are watching, if you enjoyed this episode, share it with your family and friends. And if you're living the breakthrough with type 1 diabetes and want to share your story, feel free to contact me and maybe you can be the next guest on T1D Stories. So, thank you for watching and see you in the next episode. Have a great day.